Hello, my name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. I have an interesting subject for you today. It is the adaptive funeral cultures of the Philistines. Those decadent Philistines that we think about in the Bible, the adversary of the Israelites, had a very unique burial tradition early on in their settlement, basically because of their involvement with the Egyptians. I think you'll find this interesting. The burial customs actually included these large terracotta sarcophagi that were, in a way, had a human element to them, a human shape. So they're called anthropoid sarcophagus. And we're going to divide this up also in categories, types, and cultures. So the Philistines first appeared in the Eastern Mediterranean in the second half of the 13th century BCE. At that time, the Egyptians and the Hittites were in power along that Levant, coastal plain of Israel, if you will. The Hittites, their empire was centrally located at Anatolia, which today would be Turkey. Now, both became weak politically as well as militarily because of the continuous fighting for almost 100 years. And fighting is expensive. So Ramses had an epiphany, and it was during that 19th dynasty that there was a peace treaty, right? Now, the Philistines, therefore, the sea people, exploited this power vacuum by invading areas that were previously subject to the control of the Egyptians as well as the Hittite hegemony, archaeological word for the day, which means control of. Wave after wave, both by land and sea, the Philistines assaulted territories such as Syria, Palestine, and even Egypt itself. And the last and mightiest wave of their Philistine advancement, they stormed south from Canaan into the land where they assaulted once again by land and sea the Egyptian Nile Delta. Now, according to the Egyptian sources, including hieroglyphs on a building called or at Medinet Habu, and this was constructed during the time period of Ramses III. So we're going to date this to around 1198 to 1166 BCE. And at Medina Habu, time period of Ramses III, it's recorded that the Egyptians soundly defeated the Philistines in the 8th year of Ramses III's reign. Now, he then permitted the Philistines to settle on the southern coastal plain of Palestine. Might have not been a good idea, all right? There, the Philistines developed into their independent political power and then posed a threat both to the disunified, disoriented, if you will, Canaanite city-states, as well as what we call in archaeology the proto-Israelites, the very, very early Israelites. Now, once again, this early stage of the Philistines were still under that Egyptian hegemony. Remember, they lost the battle to Ramses III. But in that, under the control of the Egyptians, and they set up outposts along the trade route, the Levant, okay, today, or back then Canaan, today we might say Israel, West Bank, all right? In that, they developed their own culture, knockoffs, if you will, from the Egyptian style. So the Egyptians had what we call the earplugs or ear gauges today, very large earrings. We even know this by examining the upper class mummies, the female mummies of the upper class. And they got very large earlobes where those earplugs once were in. Sound familiar even today? Also, the Philistines picked up the funeral custom of making these large terracotta anthropomorphic coffins. And we're going to show you some examples of what are called anthropomorphic coffins. It's kind of it comes from anthropology. All right. So these anthropoid coffins of the late Bronze Age in the Levant, we could say the coastal plain, have unique burial practice. And it is a combination of the Egyptians as well as a Near Eastern ideology that is involved. The coffins date from the 14th to the 10th century BCE and have been found in locations such as Deir Bala, Beth Shan, Lachish, Tel El Farah, but south, and most recently in the Jezreel Valley back in 2013. The coffins show, of course, the Egyptian influence in the ancient Near East, and they exhibit many Egyptian qualities in the depiction on their lids. So you have this huge terracotta coffin, but the lid itself has a face mask. All right, now let's continue. The lids can be separated into two artistic categories, the natural and the grotesque. And the bodies are separated into type A, tapered from the shoulders, or a type B, cylindrical. The graves contained wealthy funeral offerings from a variety of different sources in the trade route, such as Cyprus, Mycenae, Egypt, Phoenicia, and Canaan. The graves appear to be originally reserved for the Egyptian officials and then later became part of the Canaanite and the Philistine culture. These anthropoid coffins were fashioned by hand. You ever get, when you were young, you had a box of Play-Doh. And if you want to build something kind of large, you roll the clay up and it gets longer and longer and longer and maybe even thicker. Depends on what you were trying to construct. All right. This is the same way in which they made large vessels in the ancient world by rolling the terracotta, well, the clay to make the terracotta, baked clay. Right. First of all, in large vessels called pythos. These were very large storage jars that could be like 5 feet high. That's large. But so were these anthropoid coffins, and they were made the same way by rolling the clay into little sections and stacked and molded. All right. Then they were fired along with the lids. So when I say along with the lids, that means the lid was placed separately on the anthropoid coffin, and it could be removed and fired again. And since we have it fired again, the lids are often much harder. And since they were harder, they're more well preserved, but they remove the lid and insert the bodies and also the grave goods. And then they replace the lid. So the lids were fired again in a kiln, which were located nearby, which makes the lids a little darker. I mentioned that the second time, and that's extremely interesting, of course, to an archaeologist. So the anthropoid coffins were fashioned by this hand, and they're rolling their clay and they're molding it. And this is going to be time consuming when you think how heavy a life-size coffin is going to be. Now, if you want to know more about this, I got several books that I can recommend. Both authors are this professor. Her name is Trudy Dothan. All right, Trudy Dothan, and we'll give some examples. Okay, and I have pictures of the books. All right, first is Deir El Bala. That's a location along the coastal plain. And the second one is called Sea People. Sea People means Philistines. And Professor Dothan, actually, her specialty was the Philistines. So she liked that late Bronze Age period, early Iron Age 1 period. So let's say around 1300 to the 12th century BCE. And I got an interesting story. I don't know how I'm going to go ahead and tell it. One time I was invited to a lecture, and I was late. So me and my friend, we came in late, and it was kind of a simple setup. The screen was in front, the room is narrow, and you got two divided rows of chairs. So you got 2 chairs on one side with an aisleway in the middle, and 2 chairs on the other side, so people could sit on both sides. It was a small presentation, and it was dark. So we kind of sneak in, we sit towards the back, and the lights were low, so you really can't see who you're sitting next to. the professor that was doing the lecture had a very heavy accent, and this is so far back. They were using a slide projector. That's about the equivalent as a 8-track player today, if you can know what that is. But anyway, when they turned the lights on, guess who was sitting next to me? Dr. Dotan. I said, like, oh my gosh. And she always had this signature scarf she always wore. Not different scarves, but she always wore a scarf. And I turned around and there she was. I said, oh, Professor. I said, Dr. Dotan. I said, you know what? I wanted to talk to you for a little bit. And I said, I really wish I would have brought my book to see people and had you sign it. And also, we were trying to acquire for a museum a couple bichrome Philistine shards, just fragments of Philistine pottery, because it's very attractive. The Philistine pottery, if you see a hole, which we'll give you examples of, kind of like Picasso's, they are just works of art in the ancient world, and to receive a piece is phenomenal. And the museum was trying to acquire a couple shards by Professor Dotan, and we were using another archaeologist who she was familiar with, who was Dr. Jody Magnus. So I mentioned that to her, and I said, you know, our museum was trying to acquire a couple of pieces from you, and there was a director in the museum that was making this happen. And she goes, oh, she goes, that man, he won't leave me alone. I said, I apologize. In other words, he went after what you needed. You know, you sent this individual from the museum if you really needed something. He was a go-getter. And he goes, oh, that man, he won't leave me alone. I said, well, then I apologize because I'm a part of that. And she started laughing, and she says, you know what? She says, I'm going to give some shards to Jody and have them sent to you. You know, some and of course, I think I received them about a month later. So right now, I'd like to say thank you very much, Dr. Jody Magnus. And unfortunately, Dr. Dotan, Trudy, if I could say that, Trudy passed away in 2016. So special regards to Trudy and her remaining family, and the loving gift that she gave the museum. We still have it. And it's great to remember those times in my life that I was able to participate in events, and sometimes surprises just by going places, you know, and meeting different people. So thank you very much. May she rest in peace. All right, so let's go on with this little lecture here, because Israel archaeologists who focused on this late Bronze Age, Iron Age time period, especially in the location of Deir el-Bala, where they were doing a massive excavation. And I'm going to tell you one more story, and I'll know you appreciate it, because what happened is, remember I said that the masks were fired twice, and because they're fired twice and the second time in a kiln, they become very hard. So when the coffin itself is crushed under the pressure of the ages, of the sand and the debris, the lid itself stayed intact. And it was the lids that were making it to the antiquity market. Now I'm talking about looted, black market, and some archaeologists saw this. They were showing up once again on the antiquity market. So the archaeologists approached those that were bringing them in to be sold, and they asked if they would kindly show them where they were finding these masks. So they brought them to the site, Deir el-Bala. Now, actually, there's a street sign that says Deir el-Bala. You can find that, but it won't show you, of course, where the ancient ruins were. But these individuals who lived possibly in the West Bank, and also these were probably individuals that were using that site and looting it for the money to feed their family, because they're very impoverished. And so we can understand the circumstance. But even though they did show the archaeologists where the site was, and they had a massive excavation, and it was phenomenal what they were able to retrieve. If you want to know more, once again, the book, Deir el-Bala by Dr. Trudy Dotan. All right, get it. It's been out for a while. You can probably buy it very cheap on Amazon. It's got wonderful pictures, as I'm going to show you, as a way to entice you to get this book. I hope you enjoyed this little lecture. I did, a part of my own little experience in history. Go out there, do some fun stuff. You don't know who you're going to meet today. and God bless. My name is Dr. George Sparks. Thank you for your time.